Hello, how are you? We're still in the nervous system part in the matter life science for the LS section. Now we will continue with chapter 10, which treats myotatic reflex. We will continue document 2 of this chapter 10 that will take us in the treatment of the elements of myotatic reflex. We already showed you in the previous video the importance of the sensory receptor, which is the neuromuscular spindle, that is stretched by this stimulation by hitting the tendon of the muscle. And this stretching is at the origin of a sensory message that is directed to the spinal cord, which is the center of this reflex. And thus the muscle will receive, after this sensory message, a motor message that leads, in this case, to the extension, as you observe, because the muscle that is stretched is the extensor muscle of the leg. This extensor muscle of the leg is found in the thigh, and it is responsible for the movement of the leg. The extensor muscle is responsible for the extension, as you see here in this video. Now, this myotatic reflex has a pathway, and it has the sensory receptor found inside the muscle, which is the neuromuscular spindle. Now, the question that I asked you at the end of the last video is, how is this reflex connected to its center? Because the center is the spinal cord, as you know. And the neuromuscular spindle that is shown here inside the muscle with blue color is related to a sensory fiber, and this sensory fiber should be related to the spinal cord. Also, the muscle receives a motor message from the spinal cord by a motor fiber, which is the red one here in the figure, and by which the muscle receives the motor message and contracts in order to make extension of the leg. Now, how are the two fibers connected to the spinal cord? In order to answer this question, we have to continue with the study of the elements of the myotatic reflex, and especially with the study of the spinal cord. First, the structure of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a nerve center, one of the nerve centers of our body. We didn't explain them in details in the last videos, since they are not demanded in this program. Now we have this part of the central nervous system. This is all the central nervous system. This part of it is the brain, or the encephalon. It is constituted of the cerebellum, and medulla oblongata, which is here at the base of the brain. Now, this is the spinal cord. It is an extension of the medulla oblongata and obviously of the brain. And in the experiment of the myotatic reflex that was done by Sherrington, made a section of the spinal cord of the cat in this point, or below of it, at a given point. Now, the spinal cord of the spinal cat of Sherrington was sectioned from here. Because of that, and since the myotatic reflex remains intact, we concluded that the spinal cord is the center of this reflex. I'm repeating this idea because it should be very clear, because we have to study only the spinal cord structure that is the center of the reflex, since during the reflex done by Sherrington, there is no any center related to the body other than the spinal cord. The spinal cord was the only center related to the body. All the other centers found in the encephalon are disconnected from the body, from the base of the neck, from the base of the brain, sorry. Now, the spinal cord has this structure. This structure shows you that the spinal cord has a gray matter, I guess you know them, and the white matter. And it has also the spinal nerve that is connected to it. This is the extremity or the ending of the spinal nerve that is cut from here in this figure. And this spinal nerve has two roots by which it is connected to the spinal cord, the dorsal root and the ventral root. The dorsal root, we explained for you in many lessons, I hope, that we are showing you the schemes of the body parts as if you observe a person standing in front of you. Because of that, you will find always the right on your left and the left on your right. And you have to find also the dorsal, which is the back. You will find it on the up. And the ventral, which is the front, you will find it on the bottom. Or you'll observe the front and you will not observe the back, which will be hidden in some cases. In the case of the spinal cord, you are now observing the spinal cord as this is the dorsal part, which is from the back, and this is the ventral part, which is from the front. And you see this structure here, which indicates that this is the ventral part. And because of that, this is the ventral root, and this is the dorsal root of the spinal nerve. And for each part of the spinal cord, you find one nerve from this side and one other nerve from the other side. This is the left nerve, the left spinal nerve, and this is the right spinal nerve, as we see a person standing in front of us. Okay? For the dorsal root, we can distinguish it very clearly by observing this structure, which is called the spinal ganglion. This spinal ganglion is a mass that is found only where? It is found only in the dorsal root. Okay, this is the spinal cord as we saw. Why does the spinal nerve have two roots? I want you to think a little bit. And if you have the time to put this video off and to think about why does the spinal nerve have two roots? It doesn't matter if the root is in the dorsal side or in the ventral side, but it does matter that it has two roots, not only one. It is not connected by one side to the spinal cord. We will see. This is the spinal cord, and this view is much more clear. It shows you the dorsal root in the upper, and it appears as they are from the back, and the ventral roots are from the front, and they are observed a little below compared to the dorsal root. This is a schematization. Exactly, they are on the same horizontal level in the body. But here I have the ventral root from this side and the dorsal root from this other side, and this is the spinal ganglion that we spoke about and which distinguishes for us the dorsal root of the spinal cord. Now, how can we know what is the role of each of the two roots? We can make a very simple experiment that is done 100 years ago, and which is done. I want you to be very careful. This experiment was done on a living and awake animal, not in the case of any other dissections or something else. The experiment is about some cuttings. We can make cut on either the spinal nerve, the dorsal root, or the ventral root, and see what result will we obtain on the animal on which we are making this experiment. This is the section of the spinal nerve, and I have to tell you, after you think, because you have to be careful about what we did in the last experiments, in the last videos. This is the spinal nerve, and it is the only nerve that connects in our lessons, not always in our lessons. We will not study other than the spinal nerve that connects the spinal cord to what? To the body. And we will observe after the section of the spine and the spinal nerve a loss of motor activity and sensitivity in the corresponding body part, and which is very normal. This spinal nerve contains the two types of the fibers that connects the spinal cord, that connect the spinal cord to the body, that are the motor fibers and the sensory fibers. And because of that, when we section this nerve, we will obtain a loss of motor activity and loss of sensitivity in the corresponding body part. Let's go to another section. What part we will cut now? We will cut the dorsal root. And after we cut the dorsal root, we will obtain a loss of sensitivity only. The motor activity remains. This is a very clear experiment that will show you very obviously that the dorsal root of the spinal nerve is sensory. This is the role of the dorsal root, and this is why the spinal nerve has two roots. One of them is sensory, and you are now you will find now very clearly the idea that makes it important to have another root, which is the motor root. When we cut it, we have a loss of motor activity in the corresponding body part. So in these experiments, we found that the spinal nerve is motor and sensory at the same time, and it has a dorsal root that is sensory, and it has a motor root that is ventral in the ventral side of its body. This is for all the part, all the nervous activities of the left part that is now on my right, since I'm observing this animal as standing in front of me, and the same can be obtained in the right part of the body, and in each of the nerves, because as you see here, the spinal cord doesn't have only one pair of nerves, it contains many. Here the figure shows you 4 pairs of nerves. The nerves of the spinal cord are connecting it from the base of the head till the base of the back, and all the body is connected by nerves, and each 2 nerves make 1 pair, left and right, and each nerve has the same structure, 2 roots with 1 dorsal sensory root and 1 ventral motor root. This is our conclusion for the last question. Now, we have to confirm something now. I want to remind you only about that the sensory message should be not in any direction. It should be from the sensory receptor to the center, which we call afferent message. Afferent. It starts by a. It is an afferent message, or we call it sensory message. The other message, which is motor message, it is efferent, not a, efferent message or motor message. So the afferent message is directed to the center, which we can call centripetal, and the motor message is opposite to the centripetal message. It's a centrifugal message, which is efferent from the center to the body parts. Now I have to confirm for you this idea. When we cut the spinal, the dorsal root of the spinal nerve in the left part, as you see here, and we make a stimulation of the central end, which is the end that is found from the side of the center. This is the central end, and I'm stimulating now the central end. After I stimulate the central end, I will obtain pain sensation and muscular contraction. I obtained pain sensation. The message succeeds to pass to the center, and from the center to the upper nerve centers that are responsible for the sensations. The spinal cord can't give us a sensation. It transmits this message to the spine, to the upper nerve center that are in the skull, and it makes us feel sensations, which is pain in this case. And the muscular contraction is obtained as a response to a reflex, because this sensory message that is going into the center, it will go back to the muscle by the motor root, which is the ventral root, and gives a motor message to the muscle, which makes it contracting. This stimulation and the other stimulation of the dorsal root, but of the peripheral end. The peripheral end is the end that is from the side of the periphery, not from the side of the center. This stimulation, it gives us no reaction. And these two stimulations results confirm for us that the sensory message in the dorsal root is centripetal. Centripetal means it has this direction. It is afferent or efferent. I want you to remember, afferent or efferent, it is afferent. Afferent, it means centripetal, or from the sensory receptor, in this case, to the center. It is directed to the center, not from the center to the outside of it. In another experiment, I have to cut the motor root, the ventral root, and repeat the experiment by making a stimulation of the ventral root, and here I'm obtaining no reaction. It means that the message is the message going in? Obviously no, it is going out. And since of that, we are not obtaining any reaction when we make stimulation of the ventral root in the central end. The stimulation of the ventral root in the peripheral end gives muscular contraction, which confirms that. And we have also the loss of motor activity. It is obvious after the section, but when we make stimulation, we obtain this muscular contraction. And this is why we say that the ventral root is centrifugal. Centrifugal, it means that the message in it is directed in this direction. This is only a confirmation for what we have understood, because it is obvious for us that the sensory message will go into the center and the motor message will go from the center to the periphery of the body. Now, where are the cell bodies of the sensory neuron and the motor neurons located? We need to locate the cell bodies of the neurons, since when we have to trace the message, to trace the pathway of the message of the myotatic reflex, we have to locate in it the positions of the motor neurons and the sensory neuron cell bodies. Where are they? Now, I will start by the location of the cell bodies of the spinal nerve, all of it, and by making a section in this part, I have to remind you by something that you took in the last year. The cell body, which is the part of the neuron that contains the nucleus of the cell, it is the part of the cell that is responsible for the life of all the cell. It is the part of the cell that contains the life center of the cell. And if we cut the cell into two parts, the part that has the nucleus will survive, but the part that doesn't contain the nucleus will die. In this case, when we cut the spinal nerve from this side, from this point, and we cut it also from this point, we observe after many days that these parts die. These parts die, it means that they don't contain nuclei. So they don't contain cell bodies. And because of that, the cell bodies of the dorsal root are found where? In the spinal ganglion. The cell bodies of the sensory fibers are located in the spinal ganglion. It means here in this site, in this location. On the other hand, the cell bodies of the ventral fibers, which are the motor fibers. When we make this section, we don't have ganglion. We make one section at any part and at any site of the ventral root that is available, and we will obtain this result. The death of the fibers in the peripheral end means that the cell bodies are not in it, that the nuclei are not in it, the nuclei are on the other side, which is the central side. And since the fibers, all the fibers are the same, we have to conclude that the cell bodies are found where? Inside the spinal cord itself. In the gray or white matter, we have to make another study. The motor neurons are located in the spinal cord. Where in the spinal cord? The study is consisting of an observation of the spinal cord under the microscope. The observation under the microscope shows that the gray matter, as you see here, this is the gray matter seen under microscope. It contains many cell bodies, and each of the cell bodies has many fibers that are prolongated from it, that are extended from it. So the cell bodies are found in the gray matter, but I have to remind you, the cell bodies of the gray matter are only for the ventral root fibers, not for the dorsal root fibers. Since the dorsal root fibers have their cell bodies were in the spinal ganglion, that will contain some cell bodies as the cell bodies that we are observing here, but they have another form, they have another shape, not as this shape. And the white matter contains only what? Only nerve fibers, as you see here in this figure. So the white matter contains only nerve fibers, and in this part you observe these points. These points consist of the endings of the nerve fibers, and these lines consist of some fibers. From this slide, I have to conclude only that the cell bodies in the spinal cord are found in the gray matter, and the white matter contains only nerve fibers, as you see in the figure. Now, After we observe all these information, now I can show you again the same figure as I show you at the beginning. As I showed you at the beginning. This is the spinal, the neuromuscular spindle of the muscle. It has a sensory fiber connected to it. From what part of the spinal cord should we connect it to the spinal cord? This is our question. And the motor neuron as well. From what part? We will see now. This is the spinal cord, and the sensory fiber, which is the blue one, is connected from the dorsal root or from the ventral. And where is its cell body located? You will find it as I draw here. This is the cell body of the spinal, of the sensory fiber, the sensory neuron, and the sensory neuron is located in the dorsal root, as you see. For the motor fiber, it is found, its cell body is found in the gray matter, as you see here. I will show you many times. This is the cell body of the motor neuron, and this is its motor fiber, which is an axon that is transmitting the motor message to the muscle. This is the neuronic network of the myotatic reflex, as we studied all its elements in the previous slides. Now, this is the sensory neuron, and this is its cell body. And this is the motor neuron, all of it, and this is its cell body. And this is how the muscle is connected to the spinal cord in order to make the myotatic reflex possible. As a summary, I want you to observe this quick video. We will hit now the tendon of the extensor muscle. This is the extensor muscle of the foot, because its contraction will make this foot go backward. It will open it, it will make it far from the leg. And by hitting it, I will observe a message starting from the neuromuscular spindle and going to the spinal cord, and it will return to the same muscle again. So this is it. This is the sensory message, frequency of action potentials that is going to the spinal cord. They return to the same muscle by the motor message. I will repeat again. This is hitting the muscle, stretching. Stretching makes sensory message. I will repeat. I will repeat again. This is, now I'm hitting. This is the sensory message that is created in the sensory receptor and begins transmitted by the sensory neuron, sensory fiber. This is how we observe it, this is how we observe it passing through the dorsal root by the sensory neuron, and it passes again. I will repeat, sorry for the interruption. So the message passes in the dorsal root and goes into the spinal cord to be transmitted to the motor neuron, to the cell body of the motor neuron. This is the message that is the motor message, which is efferent. The sensory message is afferent. The motor message is efferent. It is transmitted to the muscle by the motor fiber, and when it comes to the muscle, it makes the muscle contracting, and the contraction of the muscle makes the foot make an extension, as you see here. This is a summary of our lesson. Thank you, and hope you understood all these information, because we need them in details when we will treat the next lesson. Because now I have to ask a new question about how is this reflex controlled by the spinal cord. The spinal cord is controlling the reflex. How is this reflex controlled by the spinal cord? And do the superior nerve centers, the encephalon, the brain, the cerebrum, does it have a way to make a control also for the spine, for the reflex? We said that the center of the reflex is the spinal cord, but the brain, is it able to make a control on the spinal cord in order to force it to make something in this reflex, or to prevent it from making this reflex? We will see the answers of these questions in the next videos. Thank you very much for your patience, and see you later. Thank you very much.